A letter to my professors, Jaffe, Kenneth Schafer, David L. Lewis, Professor John Vento. Gentlemen, I had sent you a link regarding a video cartoon series that was aired a long time ago on PBS stations. It was called Liberty Kids. I barely knew of it during that time and caught maybe one or two episodes and just forgot about them. I didn't have the context necessary to really understand anything regarding it, despite the fact that I actually had some working knowledge of American history that I had learned by rote in the high schools. Not much of it in colleges, but I did learn about the political system and kind of blithely pushed it aside back in the 1980s. I wish this cartoon series that I referred you over to was made back in the 1980s because all the information is necessary and relevant, gentlemen. And because of information like this, it adds context to things happening these days, and not to mention our patriotism. I have made a lot of videos trying to analyze history and political theater and context of subject matters like crazy. A way to explore and examine, try to put it in context for maybe someone else to understand what's been going on, and it hasn't been all that easy. Even when I confront people online regarding of what knowledge they have, the close-mindedness of the very few influential gas bags out there that have the right to express their opinions even though they may be incorrect in facts and figures. Giving it out, I'm a First Amendment specialist, well, not a specialist, but an advocate of First Amendment rights. I support the right and the freedom for the expressions of everybody. I try to understand more about the commercial aspects of it and the private, and not to mention the government, involved in everything regarding the First Amendment. When we do Facebook and when we do YouTube, we are consenting to give part of our First Amendment rights over to a corporation that has given us a shell of the First Amendment rights to express ourselves only to the limits of their guidelines. After that, shut out completely. People would argue about this as controlling media and controlling information and controlling facts. If indeed the corporations were treated like private citizens, I don't know how the argument would be at that point. If they were treated as government, well, then they would have an issue over that because we would go after them as citizens against our government in protest because we have a right to express our freedoms and our civil liberties. The only problem is, you're dealing with corporations, it's a different thing altogether. Which brings me back to Liberty Kids. Finding out about the history and everything else related to it, I'm hoping maybe our current generation of the youth within the past 10 years will understand. Give them about 20 or 30 years, maybe they will be putting everything else in context. But even in my kind of generation, what they call the Generation X or Generation Z or whatever the hell they call them these days, I call it the old fart generation. But even the older generation prior to me didn't exactly understand history in a different context as we're understanding it right now. Liberty is a strong word for everyone. It is a cherished item. And understanding the origins of it, both sides of it, and why things had to happen. I kind of promote this show because of what it does open up. It's not exactly a demand I would put on people's table there, but I would make suggestions to professors to have the students take a look at it. Try to understand the different perspectives that it presents, especially when you're dealing with world history and U.S. history combined, and seeing political science 101 being played out. I think it's well documented and well researched. This is not exactly a commercial endorsement, gentlemen, but it also relates to some of the materials covered in different classes altogether, such as American literature. A professor of mine wanted us to understand what slavery and human injustice was, human rights were supposed to be, and hypocrisy in our government system. And not to mention hypocrisy of our way of thinking when entering the new world. And an understanding a few authors presented in the anthologies. It's disturbing as hell because it conflicts with some of the information being presented by other professors of the past and current, but it also supports them as well. I can honestly say it's confusing as hell, and I think history should be like that. It's not concrete. As one particular gentleman in a world civilization, or actually a Western civilization class, had educated his classes regarding it. History is changing because of our perspective and our understanding more and more about the past. And the more we keep digging up information about the past, it helps us to understand where we are right now and how is it going to help us in the future to relate to them on how our country, our world was formulated under. And trying to educate people in my age bracket. And you know me, gentlemen, I'm an old fart in the classes, and you saw that. 54-year-old right now, since we're talking about 2020. And a few years ago, I was still the oldest person in your classes. But regardless of that, it was a perspective I was trying to bring into it and trying to understand more and more. Because even if I actually had life experiences past what my previous education was, I wanted to learn a lot more than what I knew. It was a privilege and a pleasure in being educated by you gentlemen. I'm hoping to return the favor, as I said before, to present this series to you gentlemen, because around 2003, this was a limited series on PBS that was trying to educate our youth. I don't think our kids back then, or even the teenagers back then, actually grasped anything because they didn't have context enough. And gentlemen, I thank you for the context. I still have to be open-minded of what's going on these days, despite the fact that we have a chaotic political theater going on right now that's challenging every principle, every preconception, and every principle that we've actually studied and been educated under attack at this point. And it upsets me a great deal. I am not an orator like Ben Franklin, but I only speak from my experience and I speak from my heart and my mind. I hope, gentlemen, that we can try to present both sides of the argument, and hoping that the students of our current and future generations will understand what's been going on, why we have these conflicts, and what our actions that we're deciding today is going to be affecting them tomorrow. So, I'm hoping you gentlemen are all right. Stay safe. Stay the hell away from the COVID. And I'm hoping one day soon, when it is permitted to walk upon Antelope Valley College turf again, I will be able to take a glance in your direction and hopefully see you gentlemen walking across the courtyards or across the parking lots. Maybe have a chance to thank you properly, gentlemen. With warmest regards, yours truly, John Cameron Weaver, former student, and still an old fort.